All right, hi everybody. My name is Mitch. I use he, him, his pronouns, and I am one of our LGBTQ program coordinators.
Hi, I'm Missy. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm the area director for the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention.
And then Amy is here as well.
I'm off screen. We are maintaining our social distancing while we have people in the room, but my name is Amy. I use she, her, hers pronouns, and I have no face to attach to this voice today.
So we are recording our message for Spirit Day, which is being held this year, observed this year, next Thursday, as of right now when we're recording this, which is 10/21. Now, Spirit Day originated in 2010 in response to suicide deaths that were partially triggered by anti-lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and queer bullying and harassment issues that were happening. In the Gilbert Baker Pride flag, every color stands for something, and the purple in the pride flag stands for spirit. And so to really honor the memory, to raise awareness, and to promote resiliency and bring a light to what resources and supports are available, Spirit Day was kind of born. Mm-hmm. And now we observe it every year.
Yeah, and so we really wanted to take some opportunity to talk about some of the information and resources that are available when it comes to how we support the LGBTQ community, in particular our young people. We know that there can be a relationship between bullying and suicide risk, but we also know that it's not as simple as one equals the other. And so we did want to talk about the fact that suicide is something that can happen and does happen to all sorts of communities, all sorts of folks and backgrounds. But we know that particular communities can be at elevated risk, have some more risk factors and things that they deal with that are stressors in their lives that can elevate personal risk. And the LGBTQ community, especially young people who identify, really are a higher risk group. And so that really leads Mitch and I to do a lot of the work together that we've been engaging in and really prompted us to want to have this conversation together today.
Yeah, absolutely. So we were talking a little bit earlier about how we know that bullying is such a stressor, mm-hmm. and something that can definitely really diminish someone's self-worth and sense of self and sense of belonging in their community as mm-hmm. well. But you also brought up a really good point talking about the bullies themselves and the concerns for their mental health as well, that I am not often on that side of the conversation. Right. So could you talk a little bit about that?
Absolutely, thank you. And when it comes to suicide risk, it's really important for us to remember there are many risk factors that come together in a person's life that can bring a level of despair and hopelessness that really brings a person to a point where they feel there's no other way out. It can be easy for us sometimes to assume, because of something we've heard or we've seen, that this one awful thing happened in someone's life, then we learn they took their lives, and it's easy to assume, okay, this one thing caused the suicide death or the suicide attempt. And suicide is not that simple. It's a complex health issue, and it's a number of different factors in people's health, including their mental health, things that have happened in their background, their personal and family history, as well as those environmental stressors, which bullying can be one of those, that really come together and have exceeded that ability to cope with them. So it's really important to recognize that it's a complex combination of factors, and it's going to be different for each person. The sooner we can start to learn and address some of these different stressors in someone's life, then we have an opportunity to intervene before a crisis happens. And the way we address bullying, especially when it comes to anti-LGBTQ bullying, if we're able to really start to talk about that sooner before it becomes such a perpetual stressor and so hurtful and so harmful in someone's life, we do have an opportunity to intervene and get people feeling supported and getting them feeling back connected and valued in their communities. When it comes to bullying behavior, it's not a rational, healthy behavior for anybody, whether you're being victimized by it or you're the perpetrator, okay? Bullying another person that's not a healthy way to cope with your own issues either, is to make someone feel worse, right? Maybe temporarily it might give you some satisfaction, but you still feel awful too. There's definitely still something going on if you're the one engaging in the bullying behavior as well. And so it can be challenging sometimes to have that empathy for someone who's being so harmful and hurtful to someone else. But we have an opportunity to try and break that cycle, right? Where I hurt, therefore I have to hurt someone else, right? And so that's something we definitely want to make sure as we clarify, is that bullying is part of, but not the whole conversation around suicide prevention.
Definitely. And so having conversations and communicating about these topics, and, you know, as well, the different people that we're going to get to know in our neighborhoods, having those conversations and that education for all youth early on also can kind of help eliminate some of the myths and stereotypes that bullies kind of depend upon at times to perpetuate that behavior, and not because they maybe feel that way themselves, but they've heard it and they're repeating it, and they're continuing to share ideas that they've heard elsewhere because they haven't been given an opportunity to learn and grow and understand a little bit more about people who are different than themselves, or maybe similar to themselves, and they're not receiving the support they need either. So having that validation and that communication in our schools, in our families, wherever it comes from, and in our communities makes a huge difference. So we were talking about our friends earlier at the Trevor Project, and we're going to share their contact information in a little bit. But the Trevor Project is an organization that does a ton of research, specifically around suicide prevention for LGBTQ youth. And we were talking about this kind of stat statistic that has been matched over and over years of research, that the reduction of the risk of making a suicide attempt decreases by 40% for an LGBTQ youth who can identify just one supportive adult in their life. And that's all it takes, is having that one person. And that person does not have to be a parent or a family member.
Yeah, I think that's a really important thing to remember if you are an adult who's listening and watching this right now, is you don't have to be blood or legally related to a young person to be that helpful, supportive adult. Nor do you have to have all the answers. I think all of us who used to be kids recognize as we get older, you know what, the grown-ups in our lives maybe didn't have all the answers, but it seemed like they did. But they at least maybe gave reassurance that, okay, I might not know all the things, but I'm willing to be here with you. We'll figure it out together and help you to feel better, right? And any adult can really play that role. And some of it just takes a willingness to listen to a young person and what they're going through. I think one thing we tend to forget as we get older is how challenging it can be to be a young person, to be an adolescent. It's never been an easy thing, and the world gets more and more complicated as we move forward. I think a lot of young people, it's no secret, are dealing with some stressors. They're dealing with things like technology that we never dealt with, or even just a few years ago didn't exist. And that's really changing how young people interact with each other, how they see themselves, and how they interact with the world. We know there can be definitely opportunity for resources to be shared as well. It doesn't always have to be a negative thing, but it can definitely be confusing and overwhelming at times as well. And so having an adult who can help navigate the changing landscape out there and who sees you and loves you for who you are literally saves lives. And so we know that it can be intimidating to try and feel like, could I be that helpful adult? You know, maybe it's a niece or a nephew, or maybe it is, maybe you're a teacher, maybe you're a coach, maybe you are a neighbor or a leader in a faith community. Whoever it might be. It could be someone who is in the school building, but not necessarily a teacher, but works elsewhere in the school building. And so we want to make sure that we remember any of us has that ability. And so it just comes from a place of caring and concern and not being judgmental. And listening, right? Listening to the story that your young person has to tell about who they are, even if it feels different from what you understand them to be, is really important, okay? And to be able to take that step back and listen more than we talk, right?
I often say when I'm having a conversation with someone, do you want me to listen to hear you, or do you need me to listen to respond? Am I supposed to be coming up with supports or really thinking through, or do I just need to be here and have my ears open and offering that opportunity to be the kind of listener that they need in that moment? But that's what it is to be a supportive adult does not mean that you have to solve the problem. It does not mean that you're taking on the entire situation and able to fix everything. It's being open, willing to listen, and sharing the knowledge that you do have, or being willing to try and gain some more to break the ice and validate and then bridge to other supports.
Here comes the disembodied voice. One of the things that we always talk about when we're doing, our cultural competency trainings or we're in our support groups is we'll talk about letting people tell you what things mean to them instead of choosing what those things mean to them, because people will tell you who they are and what that means to them if they feel like they're safe. And if we're establishing the open lines of communication and understanding that humans are very complex and that it's okay to be different and have feelings we can't process, but you have the space to do that, that also is a really great meaning towards mitigating those concerns and those issues that come up. Instead of telling people who they are, we let them tell us who they are, and we use that as the starting place instead of forcing them to a place where they're not ready to be and causing more issues without meaning to do so.
For sure. Yeah. And I think a lot of it, like you said, it's validation through just even giving that space to listen. It goes such a long way, because oftentimes if we already feel invisible, if we already feel not valued, if we feel misunderstood, like that we don't belong, that we're not part of something, that adult who helps by saying, I see you, I hear you, and I care for you, brings you back into the fold when you feel so much on the edge of everybody else.
Definitely. So I shared earlier that Spirit Day was first observed in 2010, and in 2010 I was a junior in high school. And for me, on my own journey, which I had been going on for a little bit, in kind of this silence and this, we weren't talking about it, at least not in my community at that time, my person was my Spanish teacher. And it was as simple as the fact that she let us know that we could come to her and that we could talk about whatever we needed to talk about, and that she was going to support us all no matter what. And it made such a profound difference for me that it helped me really feel more connected to my school community. She became the student advisor for the LGBTQ club that I ended up starting at that school. That still exists today. It's always really fun to visit. And she really was there for me to let me know that it was going to be okay. And even now, as I am now the supportive adult in other people's lives, she's someone that I can always reach out to if I need anything. She's remained that kind of constant presence in my life. And something that she did for me that we also talked about is, you often hear that if you're having a hard time, reach out.
Right.
And what can really bog us down is it can be hard to know who or when or what to even say to even start that conversation when you're the one struggling. So what she did for me, and what a lot of, I think, people of any age can do, is if you're noticing a difference in somebody that you're close to, that you spend a lot of time with, starting that conversation ourselves gives them a space to be heard, or at least even if they're not ready to talk about it right now, it plants a seed that when they are ready, they can come to you.
Yeah, I think that's so important, is to flip that conversation around in terms of, yes, if you are struggling, ask for help. But we don't need to wait for people to ask. If we're noticing those changes, if we're noticing things that they're saying or the behaviors that they're engaging in are shifting, their mood seems different as well. Anything that just gives you that feeling that they don't seem like themselves is an opportunity to start a conversation, to reach out, let them know that you've observed these changes and that you're concerned. And if somebody is really struggling with something like depression, the thought of reaching out to somebody else probably is just so overwhelming. And as you mentioned, when it comes to talking to our LGBTQ youth, there's that extra concern around, is this person even safe for me to talk to about this in general, right? Even if I'm not having a problem per se. And so we have opportunities, especially as those who like to think of ourselves as helpful adults or who want to be a supportive adult, right, is to lead the way, really. Be mindful of, language that you're using. What are some of the messages and really the vibe you're putting out when it comes to issues around mental health as well as around LGBTQ issues, and especially how those two come together. And be the one to pay attention to changes in mood or behavior or things that young people may be saying. The way, not just what they say, but how they say it. And, like you said, it's about paying attention to that gut feeling of, I know this person to be a usual, typical way, right? Is we all are pretty standard in kind of who we are day in and day out. And when you start to notice these changes and it's perpetuating, it's sticking around, right? It's not just a bad day. We all have those. But it seems like it's not going away. It's getting worse. It's getting in the way of their day-to-day, like school, relationships, family activities. It's worth that conversation. So we don't need to wait for them to come to us to be the one to say, you know what, I'm worried about you. Can we talk about it? I'm here to listen.
Absolutely. And in Spirit Day, too, talking about bullying and what we can do to stop it in its tracks when we see it, and to create a culture where it isn't allowed to kind of thrive. What anybody can do of any age is, and when you are witnessing, or even if you're hearing secondhand, if someone has been or is in immediate danger of being hurt, in that case, calling 911 and reaching out for that immediate support. You certainly never want to add to a physical escalation of a situation. But if we're talking about people making nasty comments about somebody, you can question the behavior or the statements verbally. So an example of that would be if someone were saying that I clearly must be deciding I was going to join the punk scene because I'm dyeing my hair purple now and I'm wearing black clothes more often, and how silly I look with purple hair or something like that. Somebody else might say, I think his hair looks fine, and he is wearing black because it's a color that exists. And then they could change the subject and move on. That's a really light example, but it's easy to kind of interject in those conversations and like challenge those statements, as well as communicating consistently that bullying, cyberbullying, and other, harassment or discriminatory behaviors or statements are not welcome in our spaces. Then as well, documenting and reporting what you can. That's a really great way for all of us to kind of be active allies in our own spaces, is to know what the policies and procedures are for reporting discrimination or harassment or bullying. So for schools, we talk about the Dignity for All Students Act. On college campuses, Title IX offers a ton of protections as well. And then in any workplace, there is also the protections of non-discrimination as well. And so really educating yourselves about what those policies are, who you go to, so if you do see it pop up, you kind of know what to do. And then making an agreement with your friends, with your team, that you are not going to tolerate this as a unit and you're going to intervene together, because that strength in numbers cannot be understated.
Absolutely. And strength in numbers can be a positive or a negative thing, right? Mm-hmm. It can be a way that we all start ganging up on somebody, or it can be a way that we together really strongly interrupt and challenge the culture, right, around bullying. And I think a lot of it does come down to culture change. We've seen a lot of that happen. The fact we have conversations like this now, right? That Spirit Day is a thing that we know about. The fact that we have, open conversations in the media around mental health, around suicide prevention, that we're finding ways, more and more ways to advocate and change public policy as well. And so it's a culture change, and it's a shift that has to happen. And it's going to be more impactful if we can get more people on board. And we're going to feel more confident in our ability to make these changes if we know we have a team to support us, right? It can be a scary thing to step up and say, you know what, this isn't right and I don't like it, it needs to stop. That's a scary thing, right? We're not going to pretend it's not. Or it can feel a little nerve-wracking too to maybe reach out to someone we're worried about who's struggling with their mental health. But to know is that we have a degree of supports around us, whether it's local, whether it's national, whether it's in person, whether it's online, ways that we can tap into that just encouragement, right? We don't have to all have the answers, but be willing to learn and be willing to make some changes. That's the power we all have, whether you're young, whether you're older, whether you're somewhere in between, we all have that ability, which is a really, I think, exciting thing. So I hope that it's something that more and more people are feeling empowered and excited about to be a part of that change.
Yeah. I definitely think we're on a really positive road right now. Mm-hmm. We were talking earlier about how next year we will have our federal hotline. Did you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So you may have heard some information and some things coming out about a change to the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline phone number, and really creating a mental health version of a 911 system. And so this is something that is scheduled to be officially in effect in July 2022, so less than a year to go, which is pretty remarkable. It's been a long time coming. A lot of advocacy groups have been involved, including the Trevor Project in an AFSP, in trying to make this happen at a national standpoint and then state by state as well. We know the 911 system is a really big web of different call centers and response centers and things like that, mobile resources, all sorts of phone lines crisscrossing as well, right? So it's a pretty big system, and we know that there are, more mental health focused ways that we can appropriately respond when there is a crisis in the community, that we can do so safely and peacefully, and not just respond immediately, but offer more wraparound care and services and options for people as well to get safe and stay safe. And so it's been a huge movement to make this happen. And then once we all got on board as far as passing the laws and saying, yeah, we all agree we need to do this, all the efforts to really make this possible from a logistical standpoint. So that's why it's taken a little bit of time, but we're on our way, including here in New York State, which is so important. And using this opportunity to not just say, okay, we need a new phone number that's easy to use, which is true, but it's a chance to figure out, okay, when we call this number, can we elevate the level of support that's happening, the different resources that can be dispatched or shared, and also the training and the competency of the people who are on the other side of the phone, including making sure that people are able to respond to the cultural needs of the community and the cultural needs of the person who's making that phone call, either if they're calling for themselves in crisis or they're calling on behalf of somebody in crisis. And so that includes to the LGBTQ community, which, as we know, is a high-risk group around suicide. And also we know that, unfortunately, it can be more harmful than helpful at times if we don't get if our initial, the person who initially responds to us can be invalidating or feels like an unsafe environment. then it's not going to make us encouraged to seek help and accept it, right? We want to make sure that somebody who's on the other line is going to have an idea of who we are and what we need, right? And so that's something too has been really incredible to see these changes taking place. And again, it just goes to show us that we have more of this cultural movement now where people are realizing that we need to make this a priority, and how important mental health is at that level of physical health and safety, right? So we know 911 exists for that physical health and safety, and now we need 988 to do its part too. And also to relieve some of that pressure that 911 has been experiencing over the years and building up. So, we don't want the dam to burst, right? We want to create some more opportunities for that flow of resources to happen. And we're starting to see that some big changes take place, which is great.
Yeah. And so it's coming down the line. It's less than a year.
Yes.
Wow.
Yeah.
The countdown is really on.
It is.
But there are supports that are in place right now too, and that will always be in place. So what you spoke about, especially like who's picking up the phone and how are they responding, that does make a huge difference. So our friends at the Trevor Project, you can reach out via text by texting the word START to 678-678. Or you can call them at 1-866-488-7386. And they also have a chat function on the Trevor Project website if that's more comfortable for you to reach out with them. Trevor also maintains something called Trevor Space, which is a long-term, you can attend every week, you can pop in and out as you need to, but it's more of that ongoing communication, that ongoing support, not just in a moment of crisis, which is really fabulous to have available. And then the trans Lifeline exists as well, for any transgender, gender non-conforming, non-binary, or other under the trans umbrella identified adults. They can be reached in the U.S. at 877-565-8860. And then a couple other resources just to keep in mind for localized resources, especially if you need assistance with connecting to service providers in your local area. 211 is a great option. And they're 24 hours, correct?
Yes,
yeah. And then also during COVID, we have had the New York Project Helpline, which is still available. It's an emotional support helpline for people impacted by the pandemic. And that can be reached at 1-844-863-9314.
Awesome. Yeah, and so I think the big thing to take away from that is there is help and there's hope out there. As well as all of these organizations have, their web presence as far as educational resources. So it may not be that you or someone you care about is at a point of crisis. It could be that you want to learn more about how you can be a better support, how you can get more actively involved in your community to be a supportive, helpful adult or peer when it comes to the LGBTQ community and supporting strong, good mental health as well, and that sense of belonging and connection. And so we want to educate anybody who's watching this to use this conversation as some inspiration. Is what is one step I can take today or this week to further along my own journey as a supportive person, as an ally, as a helpful, safe adult, right? We all can take a step. We're all coming at this topic from different areas and backgrounds and areas, degrees of knowledge, but we all have things to learn. We're all continually learning and growing, including myself and my friends, Amy and Mitch. And so let's keep growing together. And so we want to hear back from you too, is give us that feedback, or what are some of the steps that you're taking individually or with your team, with your community, in order to help, move along so that young people who are never going to have to wonder, is there a helpful adult? They'll know that they're just there. And so let's flip the script so they know they don't have to search for us, because we're right there, ready to go when they're needed.
Absolutely. That visibility, the importance of it, cannot say enough how much that matters and what a difference that makes. So Thank you so much for being here with us and for talking about this super important topic. And all the continued collaboration between our organizations has been so amazing.
Likewise.
To make these resources and education accessible right here in New York.
Thank you.